Data visualization and storytelling can be a very potent mix. The choices that you make in selecting, arranging, and presenting the facts in a story can directly influence the way people make decisions. A little planning and pre-production work can have a big impact on the success of your data story. So in this lesson, we will touch on the planning and pre-production essentials. You will be able to explain the importance of gathering requirements and use a checklist to answer the key questions: who, what, why, and how. The planning that takes place before you start crafting your story paves the way for your data visualizations to tell a story that will accomplish your objectives in a compelling way. Let me show you what I mean. In order to make good choices to tell your data stories, you should start by identifying the who, what, why, and how behind the storytelling projects. With those considerations in mind, you then need to assess what are the key elements that drive the story and which elements do not. Key considerations include who the intended audiences are for your data story and the stakeholders who want to present it. In some cases, you yourself may be the sole stakeholder. Now, if you are a novice in the subject matter from which you are creating a data story, it can help to talk to one or more subject matter experts, or SMEs, who can guide you to find avenues of exploration and help you determine accurate interpretations of the data. What kinds of data are available for use in your data stories? Does your data set include everything that you might need? The why includes understanding the business goals or other objectives for a visualization. As we will see, taking various points of view into account plays a very important role in all phases of the data visualization process, all the way from data selection to final presentation. Now, knowing the who, what, and why will help you to refine and optimize how you are going to tell your data story. For example, will you be presenting a set of static slides, or a paper report, or perhaps narrating an interactive dashboard? I find keeping a checklist of those factors, even in an informal way, can be very valuable in making sure that your story is on point and impactful as possible. Let's consider a simple imaginary example in which Sylvia, the VP of Sales at Acme Inc., has asked you to create a data story she needs to present to the Acme executive team. In this case, the who is the audience, and the primary persona is the SVP of Sales Operations. Key stakeholder is Sylvia, who will be presenting this information to the executive team. There also may be subject matter experts who will identify and talk to in the preparation of this data story. Now, the what includes what data set and use case are involved. The sales data covers the previous 3 years up into the present, and the presentation will be no more than 5 minutes at length. Why? The purpose of this visualization is to tell the story of Acme's campaign for marketing to improve sales after a period of stagnation. Now, reframed in the context of the 3 C's, let's look at it again. The context is Acme's year-over-year sales were stagnating. The challenge: the marketing department launched a new campaign to stop that stagnation. Conclusion? Well, that's not yet been determined. Now, how are we going to tell this story? It's the format. In this case, it's a tableau story narrated by Sylvia using story points. She wants to keep the presentation short, clear, and as we said, under 5 minutes, and ideally with only 3 story points. Now, depending on the specifics of your project, you may not have the conclusions when you start off, but you can list the context and challenges. The conclusion and the best way to present it often only emerge as you go through your design process. In Tableau, you can use views, worksheets, and dashboards as a source material and use story points as the place, along with, of course, the data, and story points as a place to build out and organize your story. You may find that you toggle back and forth between the 2 modalities as you refine and optimize your story. For example, you may find in the course of your work that you need to add other data or other visualizations and charts to support your story, or conversely, to remove content to help ensure that your story is sharp and engaging. Although you can create as many story points as you like in Tableau, I'd suggest trying to use as few as possible to make your story work. That is, what's the least necessary to take your audience from context to challenge to conclusion in the fewest, strongest, and clearest steps possible. Being focused and selective in your story presentation is great, but of course you also need to be focused and selective in how you extract and interpret the data you'll be using in your story. Drawing the correct conclusions from data can be very tricky for many reasons, as we've learned. Let's take one classic example. Based on some partial data and some over-eager interpretation, I could tell a story about how increasing ice cream sales are closely correlated with rising violent crime. However, that's only part of the story. Of course, it's ridiculous. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation or explain why something happens. There often is another variable that is much more directly related to the cause and effect that we were talking about. In this case, outdoor air temperature is a primary driver. When it gets hot, people buy ice cream and tend to be out on the streets, potentially increasing the opportunities for crime. So, outside air temperature and increases in violent crime go together and make a good story. It might be interesting to talk about the relationship of ice cream sales in that same context. Now, this may seem like a funny little example, but I hope it makes the point that even when relationships are very subtle and unclear, we need to be careful about what conclusions we're drawing. This example illustrates two important considerations for visualization and data storytelling: expressiveness and effectiveness. Do you have all the data needed to express the story accurately? And is the presentation style effectively conveying the meaning of the data? Clearly, a problem with either the expressiveness or effectiveness could hurt your data story.